welcome to CITE Career Connect with Kate. My name is Kate Whitfield, and I'm a principal with Alta Planning and Design in Ottawa. So the goal of each and every episode is to bring together people looking for jobs in Canada and connect them with CITE members who are working in the field of transportation, engineering, and planning. So today's episode, we have 3 awesome job seekers and 3 awesome members. And the conversation today went to a place about planning and engineering and how the two sort of professions work together. Then we covered a great conversation about interviewing and getting yourself noticed. So there's a lot of great content in this episode. So let's dive in now and meet the guests. Welcome everyone to the 7th episode of CIT Career Connect. As you know, you'll each have 2 minutes to introduce a topic of interest related to our field. I will introduce each speaker as we go back and forth between people currently working in the field and job seekers. Following this, we'll have a discussion. We'll see where that goes. And I always like to start us off with CIT members who are currently working in the field. So Stephen, I will ask you to start, but first an introduction. Stephen is a transportation engineer at Moore Transportation Consulting in Winnipeg. His experience involves mostly traffic engineering and travel demand forecasting with a bit of planning for multimodal transport and road safety. So Steve and I are meeting really basically through this initiative. So I look forward to learning more about you. I'll pass it over to you to talk for your 2 minutes.
Sure, thanks, Kate. So my interesting project was a transportation study in support of a master plan of a large redevelopment in Kelowna in British Columbia. So this is an area about 200 acres and industrial light residential land uses. And the city wanted to add some density and a better mix of uses and increase the street connectivity, make the whole area more walkable. So it was really interesting getting to do, considering all of the modes in this study, considering vehicles and walking and cycling and transit as well, all in one study. And that really required a mix of skills all the way from computer programming and technical analyses and producing diagrams and figures, writing the report, and then presenting the results. So yeah, it was cool to have the mix of land uses, mix of transportation modes, and mix of skills.
Awesome, and we'll dive more into that when we get into a discussion. So next is Ying, one of our job seekers. So Ying has an undergraduate degree in community and regional planning from the University of Waterloo, and she has work experience with York Region and the TTC. So I met Ying through a recent Meet the Managers virtual event hosted by YPT Toronto, so that's Young Professionals in Transportation. So it was like a high speed, more intense version of this with way more people, if you can describe it that way. And Ying, you impressed me right away through our interaction there. And then seeing your resume, I went, wow. So really you should be giving other people advice on how to write a good resume. So not to set you up too high before you have to talk, but now it's your turn for 2 minutes.
Thank you so much, Kate. That was really nice of you to say. So actually, I'm currently working on an interesting project called Pivot. It ends in the first week of December. It's basically an urban exploration project led by over 1,000 youth across Canada in 27 cities. And the goal of this project for us is to create an open and accessible database with youth research information through surveying, indexing, and interviewing. And hopefully that information we gathered will be used by planners, governments, and different organizations to create better cities post-COVID. So although this project is not transportation related exactly, but I do see a lot of similar themes from our research, and obviously the goal of our project is to get this to planners to use for planning purposes. For example, last week I had to research public safety indicators, and I got to look at if streetlights or what time streetlights are lit at night, and if there are streetlights at bus stops, if there are like designated waiting areas at bus stop with distress buttons, and also the number of like traffic fatalities in the city as our public safety indicators. I haven't worked on transportation indicators yet, but my teammates have looked at the bus system and bike lane systems in cities and determine how accessible these systems are. And these are all like very important indicators to be used for planning. And as a aspiring planner, I can definitely use this in the future. And hopefully everyone here will be able to access our data and use our information to create better cities as well. Yeah.
That was a really good summary.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you so much.
Tell us again, though, the group. Not that you didn't say it clearly, but now that we've heard that story, who was the work with?
So it's called Pivot, and it's a partnership between Simon Fraser University and Youthful Cities.
Okay, that's awesome.
Yeah.
Okay, well, we'll go on to the next speaker. So our next speaker is Will. Will Rose is a transportation engineer at Morrison Hershfield in Ottawa. His experience is focused on design, tender, construction admin, and I believe another Carleton grad for those of you that watch this that come from that university. Will has a series of webinars on his LinkedIn profile focused on retrofitting corridors for cycling facilities, which you can check out. So Will has worked on a large number of large road reconstruction projects in Ottawa. I don't know if you're picking one for your story, but I'd also say this is someone, if you have an interest in geometric design, to connect with Will. So I'll leave it to you there.
Thanks, Kate. Yeah, well, one of my projects is, I want to talk about one project that I did do a webinar about, successfully retrofitting an existing kind of suburban arterial road corridor, kind of like the 4-lane cross-section, wide median, wide boulevard space kind of suburban corridor. And we added cycle tracks, for those maybe not in Ontario, it's kind of in boulevard cycling facility that's kind of off of the roadway. And as part of that, we had to redesign and retrofit 3 signalized intersections along the corridor to be a fully protected intersection style and to really increase the safety of cyclists and pedestrians along the corridor. It was a really challenging project. As Kate said, I'm a geometrician, really working on like geometry and making things fit, but also a detailed designer. So I'm worried about the small minutia, right? What type of sidewalk we're using, how wide is the sidewalk, you know, a crossing distance, all that kind of detail. And one of the challenges of this project was because we were changing the signalized intersections for protected intersections, we had to move traffic poles and street light poles and everything. We ran into a lot of problems with underground utilities. The whole north side of the corridor had 2 storm sewers, a sanitary sewer, a water main, a high pressure gas main, all kinds of things that we couldn't move. So designing our intersections for our new pole placements and the safety that we wanted for our cyclists and our pedestrians and all of our users without moving any of those utilities was a real challenge. And keeping in mind too that we have to ensure we meet all of the accessibility requirements nowadays, right? So how could we put a push button so far from a curb if we weren't going to move a gas main underneath it was a real challenge. So we were ultimately successful. The last phase of our project's in construction right now. We were supposed to be paving today in Ottawa, which is a little -5 and 3 inches of snow on the ground today. So that's going to be a little late, but extremely successful. If you're curious about learning more about that, I suggest you checked out on my LinkedIn profile, the webinar. The project is on Hare Note. So really interesting project. If you have any questions about it, I can go into some more detail then.
Yeah, and a lot there too is about constructability, right? So it's the utilities. It's also like, how will we actually get this built and in the ground?
Yeah.
Awesome for sharing that one. Okay, well, we keep on going. So Stefan, I'll pass it over to you. So Stefan is a Master of Engineering, Cities Engineering and Management Transportation program at U of T. So we've had a few of your classmates, I believe, on this, and I keep meeting graduates of this program. It sounds really great. And if I have it right, you also have an undergrad degree in civil. But really, I'm going to leave it to you to tell us more about yourself and tell us a story.
All right. Thank you so much, Kate, for the opportunity to be on here and just join what we're doing. So yeah, I'm gonna talk about one of the projects I was involved in at U of T in data analytics. So it's pretty much we got data from property agents, and we had to just work on that data, do data preparation, and be able to come up with people that are most likely to lease a property within Toronto and just within the GTA. And it was just very interesting project, and I think it's also very important when we're talking about travel patterns, or when we're talking about trip generation, because data. Currently I'm working with I'm working with the TTS survey, Transportation Tomorrow survey, and the information that we get from on there is really similar to the data analytics project that I was involved in. And I think it's very important when we're trying to get information to come up with travel patterns within the GTA at large. So it's very important and very interesting project. And yeah, I just wanted to just quickly talk about that.
Oh, and so completely relevant on sort of predicting patterns and predicting choice, whether it's in house purchase or transportation patterns. So yeah, thank you for sharing that story. We'll come back around and dive into it more in this world of data. So Alex, it's your turn, but first I get to describe you pretty much any way I want, right? So Alex is a transportation safety engineer at True North Safety Group. So I realize we're heavy today with consulting industry. I have no municipal representatives, but I've hopefully a little bit of different sizes of companies, but also Alex would be a small firm where he is one of the leaders of it in that kind of small practice kind of environment. So Alex's work focuses on road safety as well as traffic operations and collision analysis. Alex is also the president of the Canadian Association of Road Safety Professionals, so another group to check out. And if I have it right, you have a board meeting following this taping. So that's one of your other hats, but I'll pass it over to you for your 2 minutes.
Thanks, Kate. And just for the record, am I the first grad from a French-speaking university to participate? Amazing. Perfect. Yeah, so I graduated from Laval University.
Grad last, does that count?
I'm sorry?
Concordia grad last time, does that count?
Not French. Well, I mean, we won't get into that.
Okay.
I'm sorry?
University of New Brunswick? No?
Yeah, that's better, I guess. So yeah, I just wanted to talk to you about an interesting in our industry in road safety. So the use of video analytics, which is definitely, we should say, maybe disrupting our industry or changing it. So usually when we get involved, I mean, as road safety engineers, is to do safety review of a facility, and we usually get, let's say, typical inputs would be collision data, traffic volumes, and what else? We would do, we'll do a field investigation. So we'll attend the site and observe road users. But now the beauty with the video analytics is that we can get much more data. So when we attend the site, we'll go there at best for 2 or 3 hours. And if we happen to see interesting conflicts, we are lucky. But now, with video analytics, we can get sample size that are much larger. So it's not that it's replacing any of what we've done before, but it's definitely making our analysis more interesting and more robust. So that's what I want to talk to you about.
But I'm gonna just go back to you, Alex. Can you just also, part of road safety job is the reviews, but also you end up being an expert in a testimony, and you don't have to talk about a recent case or anything, but just could you do a few more sentences of like those two sort of different parts of what, because we get a lot of people that say they have an interest in road safety. So I thought maybe you could do a bonus minute of different parts of road safety.
Yeah, so I mean, most road safety professionals would be doing consulting services or providing consulting services but there's a very niche part of road safety, which is to provide to be a road expert. So we get retained by lawyers and yeah, mainly or insurance companies to investigate collisions. So basically, it's to determine if the road environment contributed to a collision or not. So that's the other part of the business that we provide. That's roughly 70% of what I do, actually. So large proportion.
Well, thanks for adding that. Yeah, because I wanted sort of people to see that other sort of side of the jobs and what it's like, whether it's in consulting and then on project design or in that kind of element. But I won't make you wait anymore, and I'll pass it over to you. But I'll just introduce you next. So Anmol has a Master's of Urban Planning from McGill and is based in Ottawa now. So you're enjoying the snow too that has come upon us. So we also met at that same YPT event that I mentioned earlier. And I'm just interested in hearing more about you and the work you did with the Institute for Health and Social Policy in Montreal. So I'll pass it over to you.
So I worked on a capstone project last year, which was with the CDPQ infrastructure, which works for the government of Quebec. In that project, I and my team worked on connecting Montreal East with the REM in the phase 2. But I'll talk about more on the research project I did with IHSP this year. So that was on the intersection of mental health and urban planning, focusing on daily commute, and that mainly focused on spatial and social aspects of life in a city that potentially increases developing mental health issues. And I collected data using experience sampling method, which is like you get notifications while on the commute and you tell about your experiences, as well as through a photo voice exercise, which is a qualitative data collection method. I used multilinear regressions, hierarchical linear modeling, these statistical tools for the quantitative analysis, as well as like various qualitative analysis methods like content analysis and picking up the words most used and feelings that were described. And I found that crowdedness, comfort, and safety are actually like the three main factors that form the basis for both positive and negative experiences. And these experiences actually vary based on the immigrant status and on the pre-existing conditions a person has. So that was kind of pretty interesting project, and that kind of laid a base like that is being now used as an exploratory study to work on, like the professors are developing of like a major project out of this conclusion. So that was pretty interesting.
Great, thanks for giving us, and in 2 minutes we expect that snapshot, so we really appreciate that snapshot that you gave us. So everybody, now I just come up with a random topic for us to talk about, depending on what people shared, because I don't even know necessarily when we join in here what's going to be covered. But I'm going to try and start us off just with an observation. So I invited 3 engineers, and then I went and invited 2 planners. So I'm going to pick, I guess, Stephen Forco. Do you want to talk about engineers working with planners in your office?
Yeah, sure. We actually just hired our first planner, which is something new for us. So even when Ying was talking about the data and kind of more on the planning end and about like how the lighting is at the bus stop and those other kind of factors that lead to comfort. Like when I heard that, I didn't really think of that as not transportation stuff. Like the line between engineering and planning, I think is really blurry. And it's really good to be able to kind of see things on both sides of that line. So, and just thinking about things from the user perspective at the end of the day, like people are, they want to ride the bus. So they're going to wait at the stop and then they're going to get on the bus and maybe it's crowded, maybe it's less crowded. Then they're going to get off the bus and they're going to walk. So different professionals would be responsible for different parts of that journey. But at the end of the day, we're all working towards the same thing in enabling people to get around and get access to opportunities and live their lives. So yeah, it's, I think it's a blurry line a lot of the times, and that's very much okay.
And then what would be your biggest advice to an engineer working with a planner? Love those blurry lines or?
Yeah, read stuff. There's lots of even websites or LinkedIn, lots of good articles just about how cities are made and you know, the history of how cities have been developed, how they're changing recently and into the future. A lot of that, you know, sometimes the stuff is written by an economist or a sociologist, even beyond planning and engineering. So the title is it's something, but it's really doesn't need to be a big divide. I guess the other thing would be, if I had to generalize, planners seem to generally like more qualitative things than engineers. As a generalization, that wouldn't hold everywhere, of course. But just to be able to kind of think in more qualitative terms and to be able to take your quantitative analysis and results and numbers and everything and speak to it in qualitative terms. You know, like, here's this number, it's 14. Is that good or is that bad? Are we worried about that? Do we have lots of room with that? I think I'd go that way.
I don't know, that generalization was pretty tame. I thought you were gonna go much harder with something. When I was in engineering and someone told me about planning, they said, you should do planning because you like people. Now that's a generalization about the difference between planning and engineering. I thought that was hilarious thing to say. Yours was pretty tame, but it was very good advice. Will, do you want to add anything in there?
Yeah, if I may, to even like to Stephen's point, because I work with a number of planners as well too. And my joke of planners being interesting people, I thought that was spot on. The one thing that I've learned,
Can you say it again? What's your?
No, Stephen's little jab about planners being interesting people, I think that's really spot on. Because I'm an engineer and I work with a number of planners, and I think the one thing that or like there's a little bit of friction in our working relationship sometimes is I find planners, and once again, I'm an engineer, so take this with my bias, but I find planners work more in the ideal situation than perhaps sometimes in what's actually out there. And not to say that's bad or anything, but a great example is kind of our parable about the bus stop, where a planner was like, has done the math, has done the qualitative, perhaps Stephen done checks, and the bus stop needs to be on the far side of the intersection to make the analysis work, travel times, all of that. But then it comes to me, like, okay, Will, can you please design our bus stop, change the road, the sidewalk, whatever it needs to do? And I come back to them and be like, well, I can't get the bus stop there because the building has a patio in the summer and would actually be on top of the bus stop. Can we move the bus stop on the near side of the intersection? In kind of that sense. And then so by friction, I mean more along like there's got to be more of a little bit of a back and forth kind of thing between planners and engineers, in the sense of the ideal solution being on the far side may not necessarily be the most practical solution, or also the most cost-effective solution for the client as well too. So I think there's always got to be like that open dialogue back and forth, because we are dealing with potentially two different problems at a time.
Well, that's a great example. This bus stop thing is going to be a great example of this conversation. Do you have a follow-up question you want to ask?
Yeah, well, I was just thinking about like my time at TC, like talking about if bus stops should be far side or near side. Yeah, it's really interesting that you said that, because at first I like didn't even know what far side and near side bus stops were before I worked there. But I was just thinking like what would like the client or whoever would value the most, like planners or like engineers. Yeah, just like I guess there needs to be a balance between like both opinions.
Yeah, I mean, clients, as you say, want people to be able to speak both languages, and there's certain expectations of what will come from an engineer's mouth and a planner's mouth, but to be able to be a little fluid between the two worlds. And definitely in transportation planning, you hear a lot of engineers call themselves transportation planners. In that world of sort of policy writing too. So your far side, near side thing is neat, got a neat element too, because it could be like a city's policy is as an approach for transit. And then you got Will's story there of sort of what happens in reality. But Alex, do you want to jump in and add something?
Yeah, I just want to add one thing in the relationship or my experience working with planners is us as engineer in terms of report writing, we're not necessarily known to be really good for it as opposed to planners who are much better at it. And it's actually a big part of our job, or especially in traffic engineering or road safety. Report writing is a significant proportion of what we do. Yeah, we do the calculation, but we then have to communicate our findings to clients. So planners usually can communicate better than engineers. That's just my experience.
So beef up your writing skills on either side. Is that one thing you're suggesting, Alex?
Most definitely. It's something you learn on the job, but you know, if coming out of school, if you're already good at it, that's definitely an advantage.
You also need like a bunch of different writing styles. You need your technical writing with nothing else in it, just boom, 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 and then you need your other type of writer to tell a story. It's kind of funny. Sometimes you have to think, which kind of report am I writing to be able to do both. I see Stephen, you're nodding your head there. You know what that feels like, eh?
Yeah, I over the past 6 months, I've probably spent like 80% of my time writing reports. Definitely second Alex's comments, where sometimes you open up a document and it's like, this was written by an engineer, and not in a good way. But that's another thing for reading too. Like the more you read, the more you kind of pick up on like, this is really well written. Like I'm learning something interesting and I'm not confused about the meaning. I think those are two really big points to good writing is, say something relevant and interesting, and don't leave your reader confused. So I find it helpful to ask, or at least like to think about as I'm writing, like the people who are going to be reading this, where are they coming from and what base knowledge are they going to have?
I just realized I picked this mug today. It's the OPPI, Ontario Professional Planning Institute mug. It's totally a fluke. So I'm going to use this to say, in engineering, you go get your PEng from, in our case, my PEO, but obviously we have a coast-to-coast crowd in these episodes. And then for planning, it's that license, the MCIP and RPP from this body that helps some weight behind that planning license. So does anyone have another question, or I can move on to the career tip topic? Yeah, go ahead.
I have another observation, like this planners, engineers thing. It's more like now that we are more talking about inclusivity and involving people, community participation, I feel planners have those set of skills that like it before that generalization was made that planners are like, if you like people and you go opt for planning. So I guess like I personally feel that, yeah, like that connect with people, like listening to different perspectives and not just purely based on number, like getting an output. So like I personally have this bias that engineers would be more on the side that, okay, the number says this, so we should just go for this option because it's rational. But on the other hand, like listening to the community experiences, that also actually helps in making more friendly and communities.
It's a good observation. It's also changing though, and lots of different engineers have sort of found their way and their different strengths to that sort of engagement side. It's certainly changing in Canada. Steve O from Toronto, I want to give you a chance. You're doing a master's in engineering in its cities management transportation. I'm going to put you on the spot, sorry, but at school, do you talk about planning and engineering as you're in an engineering program talking about cities?
Yeah, I think like, the things that other people have mentioned is very important. So like planning is just very, it's just very, very, there's a lot of report writing. There's a lot of like public engagement. There's a lot of like, people talking about each values, like economic value, social value, environmental value. And so it's pretty interesting, so us as engineers, my background was engineering, then I kind of just transited a bit into, city planning, and you can just see that difference in there. So yeah, it's pretty interesting, and it's, they both work hand in hand, to be honest,
Yeah, but your program would probably be better at recognizing sort of the different policy world and other world than. So I think you're on the path where you're gonna have a career with a mix of planners and engineers in your life.
Exactly. So you're just trying to like bridging that gap between the technical aspect of it and also the, the general planning aspect as well. Yeah.
We'll just move on to the career tips. So today I picked interviewing. I don't know if it's the best topic, but we're going to do it anyways. So when I think about interviewing, people often ask me, what is the right answer to typical questions? So I think that's funny. Like, what is a good answer to what is your strengths and weaknesses? Or what is a good answer to what are your salary expectations? So I often get asked that. To be honest, in private sector, I think it's a lot more, it can be more casual, so that anything we talk about here will not be from a municipal perspective where it's very structured. Even stories of like no facial expression from the interviewers to show acceptance of an answer, which I think is funny. I could never hide my facial expression. If I thought you were answering well, I'd be smiling at you. But yeah, this world of interviewing. So does anyone want to add a maybe top tip? Alex, Stephen, Will. Alex, you go first.
Yeah, well, you mentioned that you were doing your interviews on like bike rides and stuff. We wouldn't necessarily do that kind of things at TNS. Not that I'm opposed to it, but I would consider it in the future. But it's definitely not formal. It's more of a discussion that we have. But the number one thing is preparation and to do your research before the interview. I had an example, or at an interview, after 10 seconds, I knew it wasn't the right person. So we asked the person, so do you know about her company, or what do you know about her company? And the person had nothing to say. So, okay, well, this is, no point of pursuing the discussion. We're done here, basically. So yeah, number one is, be ready, do your research. Not that you have to know everything about the company, but at least you show that you had interest on, knowing what they do and why they do it, and who's part of the company, what kind of association they're involved in, if they've done recent presentation, workshops or whatnot, or publication, that kind of things.
And in your type of company, figuring what you're about is very easy, right? Like you're a small company, there's not one that you have to decipher.
Yeah, no, definitely. Yeah, for us, it's very easy. We're 3 people, so
yeah.
Well, actually 4 pretty soon, but yeah, doing your research isn't too hard.
Another obvious one before I pass it to Will is just in this world of virtual, just being really comfortable in this space, but you're practicing that right now by lasting through this episode with good audio and comfortable in where your settings are, right? Because in a conversation with me, I'm trying to figure out someone's energy, how they come across, and that's your chance. So even in virtual, you got to figure out how to do it because this is the impression that you give. Will, do you have a top tip for interviews?
Yeah, I want to second Alex's point also about doing the research and knowing what the company you're applying to is, what they're about, what do they do, kind of maybe a little bit of the culture if you can find out too. Another top tip I would like to give too is kind of, I may botch this phrasing, but so I can reiterate, but kind of have a plan about what you would like to do with your career too. It's not just enough to say, hey, I can take on any job and I can do anything, because then you open the door to people like, okay, Stephen, Ying, Anmol, what do you want to do? Like, where do you want to go? It doesn't have to be like a 25-year down the road horizon, kind of like, I want to own this company in 25 years, but more along the lines of like, okay, after 5 years, what would you have liked to accomplish? What would you like to do? And then kind of then maybe swing that around to be like, and why is that good for the company you're interviewing? How does that also benefit us as a company, for example, and that you would hopefully be a part of? I think that's a great tip. A lot of people like to know that you're a great team member, you would like to learn, you know what we're about, but also too kind of what you yourself want to do and how you can add that to our firm.
That's a huge tip. Too many people say, I just want to learn, I just want a job. And that, even if that's true, that means I get to learn nothing about you. And also it doesn't show that you understand what the job is, because I need to see that you actually know what you're applying for, if possible, which is part of this initiative. That's why we tell the 2-minute story, so you can figure out typical jobs. But when someone says, I just, anything, I'm like, I need a little more. Like, do you want to do modeling? Do you want to do geometric design? Do you want to be a writer? Like, it might have to be many things, but if you still get a sense of someone's personality. Stephen, do you have another tip in there?
Yeah, I think between Alex and Will, they kind of covered everything that I would say. I've helped more people prepare cover letters than prepare for interviews, but I think it's the content can be similar. So for cover letters, I would always say, I think it's great to start with, like, you know, why you're interested in the company and in the position, which Alex mentioned, and that's easy to overlook sometimes, but super important. Next thing would be like what you bring, what your skills and experiences are. And then third thing is how you think it might fit with the company and the point about where you'd want to go. I also don't think it's bad to, you know, be open to, I'll help out wherever you need me, but just not to leave it there. You can say, you know, I'm willing to help with whatever, but I'd really like to work in this particular area because of X, Y, Z.
Great. So anyone unmute? If you have a follow-up, Alex, you want to add something there?
Yeah, I just want to add, you know, given the type of interview that we have, it's more of a discussion. So, you know, once we've covered, you know, your background and education and, you know, what you're interested in, then we usually try to move on into what do you do outside of work, or more of a personal level. And often we get the response that, oh, I like reading books, or I mean, nothing too, I mean, it is important, but I mean, like, people are not prepared for that question, and they don't necessarily know what to say. So, you know, just make sure you say something that is unusual, not necessarily unusual, but that would be, you know, a passion or something a little bit different that, you know, we can then get discussion going about it. That's really, you know, that's what we want to know is, yes, we want a person that, you know, can do the work, but it's also a person that, you know, would be interesting to work with in the future for X number of years. Right?
I just wanted to ask like a follow-up question, you know, about that. And, you know, how much research can someone do with, you know, towards the interviewer? So like, if I have a lot of information about the person interviewing me, is it all right to have, you know, have a discussion about the project that the person interviewing me has done, and we can also have a discussion about that? Do you think that's also a good, you know, way to go about it? So the interviewer, you know a bit about that person and kind of just have a conversation about the thing that they've done. So what do you think about that?
So your question is sort of ways to learn about someone so that you have something to make it more interactive. Is that sort of the question?
Yeah, so the question is pretty much like, you know, the interviewer, if I can, if I'm in the interview and I have to, trying to just generate some questions as someone that's applying for a role and get some information about the person interviewing me. Do you think that's also a good way to go about it? Just to, to generate conversation about the project that the person interviewing me has done in the past and just talk about.
Yeah, so Stephen, do you want to try first? I see you're unmuted.
Yeah, so every company will have some project highlights on their website. That's a fine place to start, just to have an idea of particular projects. LinkedIn would be another one that often will be more up to date and maybe even a little bit more detailed. So a lot of the time you won't be able to have like extensive knowledge of the company, but at least to have those starting points on like, oh, I saw that you did this project. That was really interesting. Like, can you tell me about that? Or how did you deal with this particular thing that must have been a challenge on that project?
And honestly, like if you look at the companies that are represented here, so Morrison Hershfield, for Will's company, we talked earlier about the LinkedIn videos, right? For the cycle tracks. I mean, that's an easy give. Hey, I watched your video is a great way of differentiating yourself. And maybe one observation. No one's going to test you on like kilometers of the facility. And then more in Winnipeg has done so much nationally. It would be another kind of, so I mean, the kind of companies here, it's pretty easy. Alta, it would be, if you don't know we do walking and biking, then I'll be able to tell pretty darn fast. We have a lot of public information, and then with safety. But in fairness, yeah, some firms can be quite large, or you don't even know. You got to find, that's another tip then, is ask who's interviewing you, right? And try and know who's in HR and who is maybe in the room as the senior engineer. That would help too. Honestly, when I craft questions, it's the type of role. So when I hired an intern, I don't expect them to have buckets of experience. So I try other things to try and learn a bit about them, as Alex saying, about maybe it's an accomplishment they're proud of. Or one of my favorite ones is, how would your classmates describe you in a project team? I've tried that one as a way of like learning about somebody. So any other follow-up questions there? Ying, do you have one?
Yeah, so I was going to ask, do you think it's appropriate to ask the company the types of questions they'll ask you? Because personally, I get like really intimidated about like receiving technical like questions, but I think majority of the company, it's like at least for the public sector, they'll ask you like situational based questions that are pretty common. I don't know if it's appropriate to ask. I've never done it before.
That's a fun question. So would we ever ask you, what is a variable of a model or anything? Is that sort of what you mean? Is like a technical question? Will, do you have an answer to that?
Yeah. So in my experience, I've only worked in the private sector, and I've never been asked to quickly solve, a geometric problem on the spot. I think your resume or your CV and your cover letter will speak to that. And also too, don't forget about your references as well too. I would say 9 out of 10 times my firm will call every single one of your references and just be like, okay, tell me about Ying. Tell me good things about her. Tell me bad things about her. Like, did she muck up something, or where did she really excel too? I think that's important. And my tip, like to Alex's point too, like my firm really does discussion type interviews. It's not like someone walks in with the big, checklist 1 through 25 type questions and like, okay, X, get a score over 50% to pass kind of thing. It's more of a discussion. We really want to obviously know that you can do the job, what you can bring to, but also, are you a person that would fit in with our group of people too, right? Like, are you the type of person that someone wouldn't mind spending 30 minutes at your desk just, talking shop, just random talking, not necessarily doing any work, but kind of feel as part of the team, part of the family, right? I think that's important. I would stay away from asking what the questions are from the interview, because then the interviewer could think that you're just prepping for the questions that you're expected to ask. And And well, speaking for some people I know, they will then send you a list of questions and not ask you a single one of those questions, just to see kind of how you would react. How would you kind of, handle problems on the spot? That's my advice.
And honestly, if it's a junior enough job, I've chosen to send them in advance because it depends on the situation. It's not meant, I'm not trying to trick somebody out. But also if you made no effort, then I can tell pretty darn fast what a weak answer is. I am detail oriented. That doesn't help me. I learn nothing about you with that kind of answer. Will, do you want to add one more?
Yeah, I just I don't think the interview, because it's a problem that it took me a while to get over. I don't think of the interview as an examination on your capabilities. Think of the interview as an opportunity to market yourself as kind of like, I am this person, I can do this, I can bring this to you, I can make your firm a better place, so therefore hire me. You kind of want to sell yourself a little bit too. I know you're applying for an opening, but from my experience, who knows how many other people are also applying for that same opening, right? So to Kate was saying, and Alex was saying, Steve, like, you kind of want to make yourself stand out. So that means kind of telling a couple of jokes, making people feel at ease. I think that's a great way. Because don't forget, the interviewer is also too a little bit on their edge of their seat too, right? We don't know anything about this person that just walked into our boardroom, right? So kind of want to kind of play that game a little bit.
It's fun though, because we also have to get that the interview is nerve-wracking for the other person, and they're trying to show their personality. Just on the references one, as a funny part of that, in private sector, there's less rules about reference. So I can just call and say, hey, did you like the person? But when I'm a reference in public sector, there's very strict rules on the questions they have to ask me, and you can never vary off the topic. It's very funny. So a public sector reference check is, please give an example of where they met the requirements of the role, and with private sector, it's like, hey, it was good, yeah, okay. Give me one story, sure, okay. So that's how I feel like reference checking in private is. It's very different than in public. Anyways, I think we've covered that subject enough. This is your chance. Anyone want to ask another job seeking question? You got some good brains here. Ying, do you have another one?
Yeah, it's related. It's about like landing the interview, because I haven't had many interviews yet. So as like a planner who's applying to transportation planning jobs, both like engineers can apply too. Like, how would you stand out without, I guess, the technical skills, and stand out as a planner compared to like engineers? Because that's quite intimidating when you see like jobs that are available for both engineering and planning grads.
Yeah, it's got to be uncommon though. How many times does someone need one or the other? Lately, I've seen a lot of city jobs have it like a union requirement of the type of background. So I'm not 100% sure about that. But Alex, Stephen, Will, do you have a response here? Stephen, why don't you go?
Yeah. So at a previous job, I was involved in hiring a summer student, and we had about 40 people apply. So 40 cover letters and resumes in front of me. And the content of them was all pretty similar, because they're all like third, fourth year engineering students. They all have roughly similar experience. So it was interesting though to see how, even just in terms of the writing skills, some of the cover letters were much more to the point and easy to understand and less wordy, and others were more poorly written. So just having that cover letter and resume to be kind of really tuned up and just get to the point and keep things clear, that was a big differentiator in selecting who got an interview. Another thing that I've used in the past is after you submit the resume, just following up with an email or a phone call, just mentioning that you're interested and looking forward to hearing back. There is a line between like excitedness and like being annoying. So, you know, after a week, it's probably good for a call or an interview, and beyond that, you don't need to keep pestering too much. Yeah, those would be the big ones, I think.
Alex, Will, do you have a response there? Just before I move on, just on getting noticed, just like a one top tip on getting noticed.
I myself haven't been in that situation, but I agree with Alex. I think just following up, but also don't shy away from, you know, shining over your skills. As if you're the planner applying for that planning position, don't forget to overshine your skills, why you'd be better than, say, an engineer would be too. I think that's really important. But yeah, I kind of agree with Stephen on this one. I think following up, showing that you're keen, but without crossing that line that you're being annoying, it's hard for everybody. But I do agree, and I've myself been successful at that. Even if it's just a phone call, just like, hey, just wanted, like a week, maybe 2 weeks later, to say, just wanted to follow up, haven't heard back from you guys. Really interested to know what you think of my application. I think it's a great place to start.
So last thing there, Anmol, we'll pass it over to you, and you have another question or a follow-up?
Yeah, like just a general question. How long does it take after the deadline to get like an interview call? Like when should we leave? Like, okay, we are not going to get a call.
Well, that's funny because that ranges. I mean, so in my situation, as resumes come in, I'm the one who screens them. So I could be pre-screening people before it's closed, right? I could just be going through them, and I could be calling some people while I'm still collecting. So it really depends on the company's system, where other places might have an HR manager that collects them all, passes them together. So that's a different timing. It's really tough. Also, sometimes we hire instantly because that's the way it worked out, and other times it can be, it's a depressing answer, months. Stephen, you're nodding.
Yeah, in my experience, the callback period can range from like 1 day to like 4 months, just depending on all kinds of factors, like how busy the person is who received the application or what the firm's workload is like. It can vary a lot based on that. Just to go back though to the point about getting noticed, I think one of the biggest things is a lot of the times there are opportunities, but they're not posted. So it's just, you need to know people, and people need to know you and to know that you're looking. And a lot of the times you can kind of get your name in before they have an opening. And then when an opening comes up, they'll say, oh yeah, remember that guy who like just kind of reached out and said, you know, he liked what we did and would be interested in working with us. That kind of puts you on a short list right away, hopefully. Yeah, so things like CITE, the other technical organizations, as much as you can be involved with those, that's fantastic, just to develop those contacts and to kind of get yourself in the lead.
That's such a good segue to wrapping up. I didn't plant that. Thank you for saying that. So, okay, then you say, how do I know people, right? I mean, I honestly want people to use these episodes to meet the ones that you talk to, but every other episode, and I don't mean connecting on LinkedIn with a connection request. I mean, messaging and just building up who you know and getting your name in there. And then if there's a connection, maybe it's an email with something of interest. But it sounds, so sometimes some of our advice sounds a little sad, right? Like, oh, it could take a week, it could take 4 months, it could take a year. Our other advice sounds depressing. You need to know somebody. But I mean, we're trying to give you some of the truth of, and this is private sector too, but it applies in parts to public. But honestly, my favorite hires are people that I met once and then And then we connected down the road and I won a project and I called them and they're amazing. And so there's a little bit, no, not a little bit, a lot of truth in what Stephen just said. So his firm wins a big project. They go, oh no, we have to meet this requirement. They're going to post a job, but they're also going to flip through some resumes that they have on file. And I'll tell my last thing again, my very first big employment, I met someone at a conference. I sent in my resume, I was rejected. They called me 6 months later and they're like, what are you doing? And I was like in life, in this moment. And I worked for them on contract and then I competed against my friends for a full-time job and they weren't gonna beat me because I had a contract with the company first and they knew that they had met me. But it was that kind of connection that was made. And then they literally found my resume on their desk. And they're like, there's this girl in Kingston, let's call her. And that's how I got a contract. So that stuff does happen. It is real. And then in these times, CITE, the organization, Alex has a board meeting for any minute now. There's a lot of different organizations in our lives that help too with those connections. So that's a perfect segue to end. So thank you, everybody. This was really awesome. I really appreciate it. So it's posted on YouTube, and Steve, our lovely volunteer, the third Steve that is not on this call, who does all the editing, he would like me to say, please subscribe to the CITE YouTube channel so you can get notice of any other things posted there. So thank you, everybody. I really appreciate it, and we'll wrap up there.